Cousin Brucie!
Cousin Brucie!
Cousin Brucie!
Can't you hear that groovy beat now, baby?
I love that theme song. Frankie Valli of the Four Seasons did that theme song for you cousins. You see, back in the 60s, Frankie, I love you.
With Cousin.
You know, cousins, I started the radio business during a very magical time, a time when all the people listening and all the people broadcasting kind of became one big happy family. And that's when Bruce Morrow became your Cousin Brucie. More than 30 years ago, a sound called rock and roll was changing the world of music. And it was changing the world of radio, too. Now, you have to remember, cousins, that radio had been around for a long time. Matter of fact, a lot longer than yours truly. I mean, guys like Crosby and Sinatra, you know their names, you know? And a lot of others had been big stars and even teen idols on the radio during their times. But by the 50s, radio was deep in the shadow of television. The live world of radio simply seemed to move over to TV, and a lot of people thought that radio was dead. No, don't worry, cousins, it did not happen. Recorded rock and roll music electrified and revivified radio with a little help from the disc jockey. You see, the live element was retained by the on-air personality. And what it became was more than live, more than spontaneous. It became one big party every day. Matter of fact, in just a few years, radio had been reinvented by a bunch of guys who really got caught up in the excitement of doing something new and fun, and by a whole generation of listeners who loved to hear their music. Introduced by the Sweet Talkin' Guys.
Sweet Talkin' Guys.
Hello, everybody. Hi, all tonight. This is Alan Freed, the old
This is Maurice from Outer Space Jocko saying greetings, salutations, Papa Duran, and how do you do?
2.5 minutes now after 9 o'clock. With your cousin, you can hear you at 37 degrees in a kind of cloudy sky. More minutes to the music you want to hear.
WMCA, good guys, sweat, that's what's for you.
Cousin Brucie loves these cupcakes. Yum, yum, yum. And they go, oh, I like that type of, I never did that.
Hello, Bubby, this is your main man, Jake. Look out, Street. I used to back off the mic. Here I come.
Oh, this is the jock in the back of the scene with the record machine saying good pop do. How do you do? So that was rhyming then. And that's why they said, hey, maybe you are the father frat.
I've always played rock and roll music. It's the only music I've ever played.
Sweet Talkin' Guys, a celebration of New York rock and roll radio. You might not be old enough to remember the sounds of Fibber McGee and Molly, or Jack Benny, or Burns and Allen on the radio, but if you do, you remember that it all happened live, right there as you heard it from some studio somewhere. But those days are called the golden days of radio now because, like all golden days, they pass by. Around 1950 or so, television supplanted radio as the mass entertainer, and the radio studios began to empty. Ironically, the playing of recorded music, long disdained in radio, was to become its salvation. One of the pioneers in playing records started at New York's WNEW in 1935.
It's make-believe ballroom time. We are asleep, no man. Here's your make-believe ballroom. Come on, children, let's dance. Come on, children, let's dance.
Hello, how are you? It's the Martin Block Show from New York, recorded and transcribed with your favorite bands and singers and songs old and new. You're sure to find something that makes real pleasant listening if you just keep tuned to our broadcast throughout the week.
The Make-Believe Ballroom became a New York institution and helped establish WNEW as a top station. Later, William B. Williams became the ballroom's popular host, but by the early 50s, a new sound was breaking through. Which had been called somewhat derisively race music, was beginning to get some airtime from the likes of George Hound Dog Lorenz in Buffalo, and in Cleveland, by way of Akron, another type of dog howled on the airwaves.
Hello, everybody. How y'all tonight? This is Alan Freed, the old king of the Moondoggers, and it's time again for another of your favorite rock and roll sessions, blues and rhythm records for all the gang in the Moondog Kingdom as you enjoy the Moondog Show.
Alan Freed had an energy and enthusiasm that were infectious, and his young audience loved him. What they heard was a synthesis of a hip and happening music and a disc jockey who obviously understood it and enjoyed it.
So I worked at the same station he worked for out in Akron, Ohio, WAKR. And he left there and he went to Cleveland. And I have been told by people who knew him at that time that there was a fellow that had a whole warehouse full of all of these rhythm and blues records. And he bought time with Alan Freed on a Cleveland radio station to promote these records. One side was a rhythm side, the other side was a blues side. So it was the record that was rhythm and blues, not one song.
And away we go with Gil Bernal, picking up that tenor horn to blow it strong, and the Spark label and the whip.
By 1954, the Alan Freed phenomenon was being felt nationally, and it was only a matter of time till the Big Apple came calling, and Alan was hired by New York station WINS. Freed had been a controversial sensation in Cleveland, and he had garnered tremendous ratings there. WINS was at the bottom of the radio heap and was looking to boost its ratings and hopefully its advertising revenues too. The promotions director at WINS then was a young man named Rick Sklar.
The decision was made, let's bring him in, put him on in the evening when the teenagers are listening and see what happens, see if we can get the kind of ratings he was getting in Cleveland, where he called himself the king of rock and roll and the king of the Moondoggers, and he called himself Moondog.
And the old Moondog Rock and Roll Party on Tuesday night is just getting underway. Got a long way to go. 2.5 hours of your favorite blues and rhythm record show for all the gang in the Moondog Kingdom.
There was another Moondog, a blind musician, who used to stand on street corners dressed as a Viking and was very well known. Came from Scandinavia. And he was known as Moondog, so he sued Alan, and Alan had to come up with a new name. He couldn't call it the Moondog Show, so they actually named it the Rock and Roll Party, and went with that name.
This is Radio WINS, WINS New York 1010 in your dial. Yours truly, Alan Freed, the old king of the rock and rollers with the cold, and the top 25 rock and roll hits of the week, and you made it all possible with your record purchases all over the rock and roll kingdom, and with your cards, letters, and telegrams. So tell us what you like.
He got ratings very fast, and the show became number one. The station became number one. And it was still a tough sell at the advertising agencies because they didn't like the music. Adults didn't relate to it. The people who bought the airtime didn't relate to it. It took years before you'd get even automobile accounts and banks and airlines to buy rock and roll.
With Freed, WINS grew and rock and roll radio began to develop. But the music Freed had dubbed rock and roll had its real roots in the African-American community and the local radio stations there. In New York, stations like WNJR and WWRL featured such disc jockeys as Herman Amos and the legendary Hal Jackson. Another popular Negro station was WOV, which actually sounded a bit like a little United Nations.
So it was, if I'm remembering right, Spanish in the morning, Italian in the afternoon, and then at 8 o'clock at night it became English. And the English language portion from 8 p.m. till the next morning was aimed primarily at the black audience.
Oh, this is the jock, and I'm back on the scene with the record machine saying boo pop doo. How do you do? Don't forget now, we'll be blasting the big rocket ship show off from the nation's sensation station ADO Radio right here in New York from 10 until 12 o'clock. Until then, look up who all through will be looking for you.
When I went on radio, I wanted to do something just a little bit different. instead of just introducing a record, we wanted to rhyme it up a little bit. So instead of just introducing the Flamingos record, we just say, ooh, Papa Dingoes, here are the Flamingos.
Are the stars.
Douglas Jocko Henderson was at least as big a star as any of the acts he featured. On his radio shows and in his live shows, he featured acts like the Jive Five, Mickey and Sylvia, and the younger brother of Frankie Lyman, Louis Lyman, and the Teen Chords. But topping the bill was Jocko himself.
You know, if you saw some of the marquees on the theaters, the biggest thing on the marquee was the name of the disc jockey. That included Tommy Smalls, the late Tommy Smalls. You know, it was real big. Dr. Jive and his show, you know. So, and Alan Freed, he was this big, and the Platters were this big. So he was, no question about it. The disc jockey played a very important part in the theaters. Yes, oh yes.
The live shows presented by DJs like Jocko and Freed kept the popular acts visible as well as audible.
I need it much. I pretend too much. I'm lonely, but no one can tell. Oh, yes, I'm the adrift in a world of my own. I play the game, but to my real shame, you've left me all alone.
The bigger national stars of the era, like Jerry Lee Lewis, Buddy Holly, and Chuck Berry, might have played more often for Freed, but Jocko excelled at presenting local and interracial acts like the Crests.
Jocko shows like the Apollo Theater, the reaction of the audience was more for the performance, more of how you performed the song. Okay, they would react to a good singer, they would react to a soulful singer. Where at a place like Low State, the people were there just to see the acts. As soon as you came out, they would scream for no reason at all, you know, just because you were there. And they probably couldn't even hear you on top of all the screams. And that was the basic difference between the two.
Well, another difference was that Freed was able to parlay his success into movies and television shows. This may have been more reflective of prevailing racial attitudes than of relative talent, but Freed himself would continue to promote the black performers and music he knew were the source and soul of rock and roll.
Alan kind of introduced many of the black artists to the white listeners, and that's a fact, you know. So we were playing just about the same music, not all the way, but it's so close it's ridiculous. In fact, Alan Freed was one of my best friends, by the way. The name rock and roll came from Alan Freed. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about that.
A big rock and roll party, you know, goes until 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's only 11:25. So have a ball wherever you are.
It's easy now to forget how alarming and troubling rock and roll was to many in its formative years. Alan Freed, as its high priest, was frequently an object of controversy. And in controversy, his career slid in the late 50s. But he remains, in memory at least, the king of the rock and rollers.
This is the station of the year. It's the station of the year. The music and the cheer.
In 58, it's really great. 1010 radio.
1958 was Alan Freed's last year on WINS, but the torch was carried on by DJs like Stanley Burns and the man dubbed by Freed the Crown Prince of Rock and Roll, Paul Sherman. And there was also a wry, bespectacled disc jockey who did much to define what a rock and roll radio show should be.
You should dial your radio to the Jack Lacey Show. Oh, listen to Lacey, a guy with a style of living a different finesse.
Jack was a very nice, easygoing guy with the big voice. And Jack did 2 shows a day, 9 and noon, and then he came back and did afternoon drive. I worked cheap, Jack said. That's why they hired me.
Yeah, it's the Big M, the Bruce Morrow Show. Okay, Cousin Bruce, go!
Cousins, the wind's time right now. It's 4 minutes after 7 o'clock here in our beach party. We have music for you. How about going to the old musical museum turntable right now? The Eldorado's at my front door.
1958 at Wynn's also saw the addition of a young DJ from Brooklyn called Cousin and another called The K.
It's Murray the K with the swinging soiree.
I sat with him and came up with the name of the show, the Swingin' Soiree with Murray the K. We kind of had a creative session and kicking ideas back and forth, came up with that.
Murray the K's Swingin' Soiree became a choice event for listeners and record industry insiders alike.
Murray was a dear friend of mine, and I used to go with him when he was doing his shows at the Fox Theater, and that's when we latched on to Stevie Wonder.
Hi, this is Stevie Wonder, and I'd like to tell you that I'm going to be at the Brooklyn Fox Theater starting August 30th.
And in addition to the 13-year-old genius, there's the fabulous Benny King, that Mickey's Monkey Crew, the Miracles for You, the Shirelles, the Dovells, the Angels of my boyfriend's back vein.
Murray, broke Bobby Darin in the late 50s. And now, also the success of the Shirelles was because of Murray. Murray's the one that really broke that group. I promoted them, but Murray broke on radio. The disc jockey was very important at that time because a lot of disc jockeys, like a Murray the K, okay, like a Jack Lacey, who was very important those days, okay, they did their own programming. I mean, no matter what they wanted to play on the radio, they controlled their own show. At that time, Murray was ahead of the game. I mean, he used to come in with the straw hats, and dance around and with his dancing girls and the whole thing. He was a great salesman, fantastic. I mean, he was more of he was a personality. I mean, he used to even dance good. I mean, he was a kooky type of a guy. I mean, he used to dress weird. It was different. I mean, no disc jockey would do what Murray does. I mean, Murray used to do things way out.
Oh, baby, here I be on our swinging soiree, and for those of you who want to be swinging all along, hand-holding, submarine race watching, you want to? Well, come on in.
Murray also promoted through his live shows at venues like Palisades Park and on the air, local acts like the Dell Satins.
Yeah!
When Teardrops Follow Me started to become a big hit in New York, and he used to have his show at the Brooklyn Fox. We were on one of his live shows, and we had to work with the Righteous Brothers, Little Eva.
Best. We did even the whole Motown review. We opened up for that with Marvin Gaye, Temptations, the Four Tops. We did have rehearsals before the shows. He was very theatrical, and everything was staged out. Everything was staged out. We did, each act did maybe 2 or 3 numbers, they're big hits. Murray, like I said, staged it out, and we had 4 or 5 shows a day we did for a week. What do you do for rock and roll, right? For rock and roll.
In the early 60s, WINS presented its most macabre on-air personality.
From the little radio station around the corner and up your block, the Matt Daddy Show.
All right, Matt Daddy here, the Monday scene. Another week is moving on. You heard an up-and-comer and one not a hummer. That's the Wynn's premier sound. It ain't a square record because we only play round. This is Matt Daddy at the 10:06 type hour. Here on the tower, turning on the power. 50,000 watts.
Pete Mad Daddy Myers was one of the last big-name personalities at WINS. The balance of power in New York radio was changing as some new stations began to make themselves felt.
We're the 4 seasons and all year round. Winter, summer, spring, and fall. We love the good guys best of all. WMCA, yeah.
Every morning, every evening, we play the hits. And between time always means time to hear the hits. So will you station at 570? Swing with the good guys on your radio. Start your morning, end your evening, and hear the hits. Things are swinging, and we're bringing you all the hits. More dials are twisted to WMCA because we're the good guys, we're the fun guys, we play the hits.
the good guys always did things as a group. We would do individual record hops and things, but we made appearances, we all went. And it was a feeling of buddies, you know. Mother packed us lunch. We never mentioned wives on the air. We were never married. We were always, 25 years old and very available and clean cut. And that was the image, and it worked.
The whole town's talking about the good guys.
And the unlikely den mother of the good guys was program director Ruth Meyer. Under her leadership, the concept of a team of DJs had great success.
We are the good guys, we're really good guys. We play the hits for you. Oh, baby, dig us. You'll be a good guy, too. Swinging with the good guys. WMCA with the good guys.
Remember, you do not have to buy a good guy sweatshirt. WMCA gives them away all day, every day, so stay tuned. Joe O'Brien, Harry Harrison, Jake Spector. Danny, of course, uses the knock-knock affairs. Your leader BMR does a swapping bit. Stay tuned to the number one. Let's find out. WMCA, baby. Oh, what's happening?
Hello. Good morning.
Bonjour.
Buongiorno.
Hello.
Buenos dias.
Greetings to Massapequa.
Good idea, Ben.
It's time for my favorite radio announcer.
Oh, thank you, lady. Joe O'Brien here until 10 o'clock this morning.
The Harry Harrison Show.
I play the hits for you, Mom. You're the
Queen of the house.
Are you well and happy, huh? On Wednesday morning, I hope so. Harrison, Andrew O'Brien, till I sell the gun at once, Jack Spector.
We were encouraged to be personalities. That's what would make us different. I mean, Mary the K was Mary the K, Ingram was Ingram, Brucie was Brucie, I was myself, B. Mitchell Reed, O'Brien. We were all a little different. Everybody had his own little shtick. And there were no rules. I mean, if you did something, you say, you can't do that. What do you mean? I just did it. Oh, okay. Then it's okay. So you just go on ahead and keep doing it.
Hey, it's your main man, Jake Bubby at WMCA, home of the good guys.
radio with a special ingredient.
What's that?
Companionship.
Individually, the good guys had their own special friends in the music world.
I had already been in New York 2 years. We were the good guys about a year. And I knew Jackie's manager very well, and through him I met Jackie, and we got to be fairly good friends. And he said, I don't like the way you sign your show off. What is this? Goodbye, I'll see you tomorrow. He said, forget it, nothing. I said, what do you think I should do? He says, this is your main man, Jake, Lookout Street. Here I come. I said, you really think I ought to do this? He said, yeah, you should do it. And I began doing it the very next day. And it stayed with me ever since.
Your main man, Jake, got a split. Lookout Street, here I come. I'll be right there because after WMCA News, it's the Good Guy Show with me, Dandy Dan Daniel. Your good music station in New York. And by popular demand, I would like to reinstitute that well-known greeting of, hi, everybody. It's New Survey Day and live from New York on the nation's most talked about radio station, WMCA. America's most adequate disc jockey, Dandy Dan, and the hits you want to hear.
WMCA with the good guys.
With the most talked about radio show in the entire New York chair of the most talked about station in the nation, BMR, WMCA, Wide Weird World from WMCA in New York, the voice in New York, Uncle Syrup City, where the flower is gone. He just said that none, it's all right, so much in love and jazz like. In other words, more sound with BMR.
B. Mitchell Reed, a.k.a. BMR, sounded as much like a fast BMW as a DJ. He was later replaced by Gary Stevens and the Willie Burger.
Oh, look who's here. Buying fancy. He's been over in Switzerland checking things out. Did you find us a place to live yet or what? No, but you kissed a bunch of chicks and you just want to say to what? They're going to change it from French to Swiss kissing. Now cut that out, will you? Now stop that.
And if you stayed up late enough, you could hear Dean Anthony.
This is Night Watch with Dino.
On your radio, and thank you so much for putting me on.
It's so groovy. WMCA.
Hey, this is Coppertone's Hollywood correspondent, Army Archard, visiting Sharon Tate, exciting co-star of the Martin Ransohoff film, Don't Make Waves. But you do make them in the picture, Sharon. Great big ones.
Why, thank you, sir. I love being out in the sun.
And when someone asks how you get such a terrific tan?
Well, I tell them, join the Tannables. Use Coppertone.
Get the fastest tan that anyone can. A tan don't burn, get a Coppertone tan.
A Coppertone tan really brings out the best in a girl.
Sharon Tate, you took the words right out of my mouth.
Right, and it's pretty sloppy, too.
Dino was typical of the slightly irreverent good guys. Their brand of youthful fun and camaraderie made much of New York feel like they were a part of the good guys, too.
I'm glad I was on when I was on. Radio was dying as we knew it, and the TV was more and more taking hold, and radio had no place to go, so it went with us because we were pioneers, I guess, and didn't know we were being pioneers. We never thought of it that way. It's just a good job.
WMCA called itself the Voice of New York, but it was a 5,000-watt voice up against a 50,000-watt voice.
There's fun and excitement on WABC. Wherever you go, whatever you do, take 77 along with you. There's fabulous fun-filled features, and with a swinging 7, you'll have a ball. WABC.
In 1962, Rick Sklar left WINS and went over to WABC.
When I came over to WABC, it was, the fourth rocker in the market, and that's no place to be. You don't get business that way. So I was determined to be number one, and that meant controlling everything very thoroughly. And what evolved was this very, very tight format.
Clear skies, WABC Radio Charm Top right now, 21 minutes before 10 o'clock. Mostly cloudy tonight, lows around 35 degrees. Cloudy tomorrow with a chance of possible precipitation. It's going to rain tomorrow, possibly.
We allowed each disc jockey to develop his own personality. I say his, they were all male in those days. And no two were alike. They were all very different.
Hello again, everybody. This is Herb Oscar
This
Anderson.
is Ron Lundy on a Monday morning in New York.
More of your Ingram Magic.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Cousin Brucie in New York City with old us.
Midnight to 6 with yours truly, Charlie Greer here at WABC.
The WABC day started with the morning mayor of New York.
And now, here's Enrico Caruso. Hello again. Hi, Enrico. Here's my best to you. Hello again, everybody. This is Herb Oscar Anderson. And, of course, I come your way every morning over radio WABC from 6 until 10 o'clock, New York in the morning, your information center. We'll have all the regular time checks, the weather, the traffic reports, and all of your favorite music. Now, that's the Herb Oscar Anderson Show on WABC, the new sound that all of New York is talking about.
Now, you must remember the hatred that rock and roll presented back in those years. Now, here you had this major corporation, the American Broadcasting Company, WABC, flagship operation for the American Broadcasting Company. Now, all of these stockholders would come to New York, and their wives would all be dressed up, and they would go to these beautiful, fancy places in New York, and then they would tune on the company in which they own all this stock. And here you've got these fellas wailing away, and Ma kind of sits back and looks at her husband and says, Freddie, do you know what you're doing? So we had to present in the morning for two reasons. One, for corporate identity, and two, because at that time you could not sell. You could not command the dollars for a straight rock and roll show, regardless of the ratings. So we had to broaden the audience as much as we possibly could.
Hello again, everybody. This is Herb Oscar, and if no one has said it as yet, may I be the first. A good morning. And indeed, it is a good morning. The sun is shining. Our temperatures are going to be up. It's going to be a spring-like day. And I tell you what, gals, you bought them about 2 months ago, I would imagine. You've set them aside, wanting a good morning to wear them. Okay, as the morning mayor of New York today, you can wear your hot pants.
I would like to be remembered as a person who was able to bridge that unbridgeable gap, which is a difficult bridge to gap.
At the opposite end of the day, WABC offered up a more rock-oriented all-night show.
Hello there. Good morning. This is Ron Lundy.
Either go, Ron Lundy, 77 WABC.
Good morning. It's midnight in New York, and we've got music. A whole bunch of things. We've got Sloopy. As the way I feel this morning, you have Sloopy.
I left the top-rated radio show in the Midwest to come to New York and work all night.
Lundy eventually moved on to the midday spot at WABC, and his show led into the spot held by the man many considered New York's top disc jockey.
I mean it, though. 13 minutes past 5 on your Ingram chicanery.
Dan was very funny. Very funny, very quick. Quickest mind I ever worked with. So quick.
The Doxy people made the simple clam into a great stuffed clam. Instead of using old-fashioned ocean-type seashells, they stuffed nifty little aluminum shells. You pop them in the oven, and in minutes, you got melted aluminum.
You know, my favorite example would be Dan Ingram coming on the day after the all-nude musical O Calcutta opened in New York and saying, well, I went to see O Calcutta last night. A friend of mine was in it, but I was very disappointed he had such a small part.
Half an investment. What is it you want, sir?
And if Dan Ingram wasn't the top DJ in New York, then Bruce Morrow was.
Hi, everybody. Here's Cousin Brucie.
I was looking for a handle, a shtick. Right? Shtick was a classical Latin word with, please give me something to hang my hat on, right? And one night a little black lady came into the studio, a little old white-haired lady. In those days we used to let people come in the studios. We weren't afraid of our lives. Gods would bring somebody up and say, Mr. Morrow, can we have this lady would like to see you? Well, this little old lady, I said, sure, sit down. And we were playing records in those days, right? Didn't have cartridges and DATs and CDs or anything. And I said, excuse me 1 minute, ma'am. And I put my record on, queued up my record, and put the record on. And I said, yes, can I help you? And she looked at me very sincerely and said, Mr. Morrow, do you believe we're all related? And I said, yes, ma'am. I do. She said, you do? And I said, yes, really. And she said, well, I'm in trouble. Cousin, lend me 50 cents to get home.
I want to say hi, especially low right now, to Cousin Elaine and Aunt Lucy. Elaine Hollis. Hello, Elaine. Sweetheart.
Cousin Brucie is very real because Cousin Brucie is not my alter ego. It is not a cartoon character. Cousin Brucie is the real person here. I take that very seriously. Matter of fact, I'm considered to be kind of a cornball when it comes to that. I'm a New Yorker. And there's nobody cornier than a New Yorker. And to me, the word corny is nice. It's warm. It's family. And my kids call me Cousin Daddy.
Whether Cape Crusader or Kissin' Cousin, Cousin Brucie kept him coming, and he broke all kinds of ratings records. WABC also broke other barriers in 1965 when Chuck Leonard was hired as the first black top 40 DJ in New York.
I was all of a sudden thrust into a situation. Remember, I became a WABC All-American Disc Jockey after being in the radio business about a year. And here I was, you know, a curly-haired kid from the Midwest and sitting in a New York City radio station. I've always figured they were going to find me out. So I was ready to move out at any time.
Moving back into the overnight spot when Lundy went midday was the all-night Happy Huggy Bear.
Happiness is Charlie Greer. Ooh, we're gonna have fun.
On 77.
That little fun, you're ready, yeah. Here's Petula Clark standing by here on the Charlie Greer Show. #1 from the survey. Hey, for New York and the nation, the big show from midnight to 6 with yours truly, Charlie Greer here at WABC.
I started on the air on December 7th, 1960 at WABC. And when the first ratings came out, the general manager, Hal Neal, called me in, and he said, look at this, Greer. You're #2 in the ratings. And I had a peak of 82.4% of the audience out in Akron, Ohio. And I was overwhelmingly #1. And so when he showed this to me and I was #2 here in New York City, I thought he was going to can me. I really did. He said, are you kidding? Got out an old ratings book and they had places there, they had some kind of a symbol. And you look down in the explanation, it said no sample, meaning that no one they called was listening to WABC. That was my show that I had inherited. And in the first book, it went to #2 in the ratings. But I was apologizing for not being #1, and I was serious. I was very naive.
Such naivete would give way to confidence as WABC built the most successful house of on-air personalities ever seen in New York.
3 minutes after 1 o'clock on the satellite. Big Daddy Night Nick Babalu here for all cool night nicks and night chicks, and especially those beautiful chick nicks on WABC, the big sound of the big town, on the all-night satellite, where nighttime is the bright time on WABC and nighttime is flight time.
Filling out the roster of highly successful and popular disc jockeys at WABC were men like Babalu, Bob Lewis, Scott Muni, later a fixture on FM radio in New York, and Bob Dayton. Each had their own style and their own shtick. Roby Young was the All-American who contributed to one of the all-time hoaxes. In 1969, Young reported on the air the wild rumors that Beatle Paul McCartney was dead. Paul, of course, was not, and an embarrassed WABC could only watch as arch-rival WMCA rubbed their noses in it. From the very beginning, WMCA had been closely associated with the Beatles and Beatlemania. The station did cross-promotions that furthered that association, such as a Fab Four single record sleeve with the good guys on the flip side. But the New York DJ who made the most of the Beatles and his relationship with them was none other than Murray the K. So linked with the Liverpudlians did he become that he was called the Fifth Beatle.
Well, actually, he made himself the fifth Beatle. I mean, he nominated himself the fifth Beatle. They're very simple. He goes on tour with the Beatles. I mean, the Beatles come here, and of course, the Beatles know he's kooky enough to be with them. I mean, Murray had the long hair at that time. He with a straw hat, whatever. He fit right in with these fellas. These fellas liked him. Okay, not only that, he had a strong power show. So of course, one hand washes the other. So what happens? Murray went on tour with them. I mean, Murray went to Florida with them. He was in New York with them. Went to Memphis. Went to Indianapolis. He went all over with them. And Murray's like the fifth Beatle. Went on the boat with him. He takes a picture with them on a yacht, whatever that Castro gave him down Florida. And they toured around, and he nominated himself as the fifth Beatle. And the Beatles got a big kick out of it.
Give my regards to everybody over there, you know.
I sure will, Paul. Take care, babe.
To everybody listening to the radio program, okay?
Right.
Thanks, Murray. Here's Ringo now.
Right.
Hello, Murray.
Hi, Ring. How do you feel?
Pardon?
How do you feel?
Fine, thanks.
Murray went on to court such British invasion groups as the Dave Clark Five and the Rolling Stones. But it was to be his last hurrah at WINS. In 1965, at the height of Beatlemania and the revitalization of rock, WINS was sold and changed to an all-news format, forsaking rock and roll forever. WABC was not about to concede the Beatle battle to anyone.
This is Gotzo with the free Beatles fan club cards for you from the Beatles American Radio Fan Club Headquarters, WABC.
I'm John, I'm Paul, I'm George, I'm Ringo. We love WABC.
We love you Beatles, oh yes we do. We love you Beatles, and we'll be true. When you're not there to us, we're blue. Oh Beatles, we love you.
Now this is Cousin Brucie. We are in the hotel. We are broadcasting live. We will have the only live broadcasting here, of course. This is the winning medal that was struck by, well, I think Cartier of New York City. Cartier. That's great. Now, want to read it out for us?
The Order of the All-American 1965 award to the United States.
All right, John, will you turn it over now? I think there's an inscription on it for you.
Presented to John Lennon from WABC Radio. That's no promos, isn't that wonderful?
Correct, John, thank you. Look, this is Paul's medal.
The Order of the All-American 1965 award to the United States.
Can you turn it over, Paul, and there's an inscription on the back.
Watch this now. Presented to Paul McCartney from WABC Radio.
Right. Well, we hope that you keep that and cherish that as sort of a souvenir of this trip. It's another exclusive scoop for WABC Radio, broadcasting live.
Now WABC and WMCA were locked in a war of exclusives.
You heard it first on WMCA.
77 super hit ABC. It's a hit.
We exposed more records than they did. Had a larger playlist. We played more rhythm and blues than ABC did. In fact, in that time period, they took a special, at that time, Hooper rating, I think it was. They're out of business now, in Harlem. And we beat the R&B stations as their favorite radio station.
WMCA remained the top local station within the 5 boroughs of New York City, but its reach didn't extend much beyond the metropolitan area.
We were a 5,000-watt station, and ABC was a 50,000-watt station, and you couldn't hear us in New Haven, and you could hear them. You couldn't hear us in Suffolk County too well. You could hear them. So it was a handicap in that regard.
They had complete control of their airtime. We did not. because WABC, remember, was a network flagship. That meant from 6 p.m. to 7:20 p.m. every evening before the teenage show went on, we had a news block.
Though originating out of Manhattan, WABC reached the furthest ends of the New York-Philadelphia megalopolis. Beyond that, it was heard all over the United States and Canada on the tremendous power of its 50,000-watt clear channel transmitter.
We had 50,000 watts of power. You could pick us up on the moon. And it was, we went all... Bruce Morrow and the night show went into 40 states at night.
A guy that was a radio engineer out in L.A. used to pick up the show on his car radio going home.
And so, the two stations slugged it out in a heated radio war of the ratings. Overall station ratings in 1965 showed WMCA still leading the race.
There was a tremendous amount of competition within the area that we competed for. And they were the good guys, we were the All-Americans. We were the All-Americans, they were the good guys. We got the records first because at night I reached 40 states. The Cousin Brucie thing spread because of the huge power of WABC. Plus, I was there at the right time.
If it was the right time for Cousin Brucie, he was certainly the right man for WABC. Though his station was rated number 2 at that time, he was consistently rated the number 1 disc jockey in the number 1 radio market.
Cousins, what a time that was. The idea that you could program a whole radio station with rock and roll for teenagers was catching on quickly. Here, let me give you an example of how quickly things changed back then. When I went to work at WABC in 1961, it was a station rated, I think, like 8th and 9th in New York, and still very confused about the new world of rock and roll. Now, Cousins, on the one hand, they had a very exciting talent named Dan Ingram, who was really clicking with all the kids. But they were still featuring a creaky old 40s type morning show from Chicago called The Breakfast Club. Here, let's see if I can remind. Good morning, Breakfast Clubbers. We're proud to greet you. I mean, one of those things. Oh, yeah, I'm sure there were people who just loved The Breakfast Club, but they certainly weren't the kids listening to Dan Ingram and your Cousin Brucie. Anyway, listen to this. Our station manager was determined to boost our ratings, so one day he challenged the 7 resident DJs by offering us all $150 and a brand new suit to the first one of us to reach number 1. Now, Cousins, listen, $150 back then was real money, big money. And a new suit, well, come on, a new suit is a new suit any old time. So you're probably saying, what happened, Brucie? I'll tell you. 1 month later, he calls us into the room, right? And he says to us, gentlemen, he thought he was a first sergeant or something. Gentlemen, the $150 and the new suit is going to every one of you. Well, celebration, all 7 of us had reached the number 1 rating in our time slots. 7 very happy guys with new suits, $150 in our pockets, and a trench coat bonus to boot on top of that. Now, Cousins, at WABC, it was the beginning of the golden age of top 40 radio. And happily, the end of So Long You Breakfast Clubbers, we're happy to lose you. The Breakfast Club was finished.
In the late 60s, WABC began to outstrip WMCA in the ratings war, but MCA continued its tradition of breaking local acts. Jack Spector was among the best at this delicate art.
We were doing a lot of Jack Spector's hops, and he had grown fond of us, and we had told him that we were planning on getting together with another group from Long Island.
They sounded so good. I think there were 11 of them. I said, wow, why don't you get together and form one group, and hey, we thought about that, but what are we going to call ourselves? Who's going to 11 pieces? Well, I don't know. Brooklyn Bridge, Nosebleeds, what do I care what you call yourselves? You guys sound great together, you should record.
And so, the Brooklyn Bridge was formed. And they did go out and record an album, and then turned again to Jack for some advice on which track to release as a single.
They were going to release a song before The Worst That Could Happen, and they sent a copy over to me and asked what I thought of it. I said, no, that's a good album cut, but that's not a single.
And it was the 3rd cut on a choice of Johnson. It just grew. You see, a record grows in the studio, and that record grew, and we had a feeling that was going to be the one.
And so I got a gold record for that, which I'm very proud of. It's on the wall of my den, along with the baseball trophies.
WMCA continued to put out a wide range of anthologized albums featuring recent hits presented by their on-air personalities. MCA's commitment to the music they played was not enough, however, to withstand a similar playlist and an onslaught of clever promotions from rival WABC.
It's the third annual WABC Principal of the Year election.
And an April Fool's Day prize from WABC. On April Fool's Day, each of the WABC All-Americans will try to fool crafty Dan Ingram with April Fool tricks suggested by you.
You'll never fool me.
To win this Cousin Brucie boat ride, fold a piece of paper into a simple paper boat, the kind children make. Print your name and address on the paper boat with ballpoint pen or felt marker. Then Ron Lundy, the face that sank 10,000 ships, will jump in and make waves.
Oh, Lord, yeah, I remember this. They got me involved. I was always getting involved and stuff. And the contest, I don't remember what it was, but people were making little paper boats.
The sales department had some kind of a tie-in with a new City Squire motor inn that had opened, and they had a swimming pool on the top there.
And I was to jump into the pool where they had the paper boats, okay? And the last one to sink won $1,000 or whatever, right?
And we said, Ron, you'll jump in the pool and you'll do this. And he said, okay.
They got me up there in like a 1890s swimming suit with the stripes and the little straw hat and the whole thing, jumping in the pool to sink the boats to see which one would stay afloat the longest. And they had some Playboy bunnies with me, right? So, now, let me go back to the beginning on this. I can't swim.
Goes into the pool, and we had to rescue him.
And you see the little straw hat. You know, you see my head come up and go into that little straw hat and thing, and he's pulling, I'm saying, you know, I really can't swim. And they're going, ha, 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 ha. You know, Ron is, and then after a while, I think Dan was there, Bruce or somebody go, you know, I think Ron's drowning. I really was. And the thing is, and I started splashing those boats, and I got out of the dumbest things I ever did in my life.
So we had to move everything to the kiddie pool. You know, so it was only 3 feet deep.
God, I was such a fool.
He just didn't know how to swim.
Oh, God, why'd I ever get in this business?
Then there was the business of the infamous Mona Lisa promotion.
We'd heard the Mona Lisa was coming to the United States, and so we thought it would be cute to do a little promotion and say, hey, we'll give $100 to the person who paints the best Mona Lisa. And then in the discussions about it, the question came up, well, most people can't paint, so we'll say, well, we'll also give $100. And $100 was money in those days, like $1,000 is today. We'll give $100 to the worst person who paints the worst Mona Lisa. And just for fun, I said, well, let's also give $100 for the smallest and $100 for the largest, and see what happens. And then those little old ladies upstairs said to me, now, Mr. Squire, how do you define the best? There must be rules. And, you know, what is the best Mona Lisa? You can't just say this one's better than another. So I said, well, I don't know how would we do that? They said, well, if you had an authority who was an artist, we would accept the artist's word. So we went looking for an artist, and our press agent, Morty Matz, found Salvador Dali, who was always looking for publicity, and he agreed to judge the contest, pick the best Mona Lisa.
In the face of such surreal and popular promotions, WMCA ultimately lost the ratings war with WABC. But at the same time, a very real war was going on in Southeast Asia. And while that war ground on year after year, a war developed within America itself about whether we should be in Vietnam at all, and about issues of civil rights and social justice. It was a wild and convulsive time that, of course, touched the radio world too.
Music is a newspaper. It's the town crier. And when the world started going crazy, when everything started getting screwed up, I'm talking 67, 68, 69, assassinations, international turmoil, Russians are marching all over the place. We're involved in quote-unquote police actions, which are really wars. We had tremendous civil rights strife here in the United States. The music started reflecting it. We started getting these so-called protest songs. Well, by this time, guys like Cousin Brucie knew that it was over for me.
By this time, the long dormant potential of FM radio began to be realized. WOR-FM began broadcasting rock and roll in full, clear, and powerful stereo, a change that reflected the growing technological sophistication of the record-buying public. Some venerable names like Murray the K and Scott Muni moved over to FM, but music was now so popular that it didn't need the DJ's help to make it go.
In the 50s up to about, I would say, 1966, the DJ was, if not more popular than the music, certainly as important as the music. And I think once 66 hit about or so, people started saying, well, the music is now more important than the disc jockey. The disc jockey then became the presenter, and, you know, people were, okay, I like him, maybe I don't like him, but it's really not important. And I think that's when personality radio started to go downtown, if you will.
What happened was really a downfall of the technology. What you had was FM came in. The government ruled that the entire FM wavelength was being wasted, the whole bandwidth, because nobody used it. 95% of the listening was to AM, even though FM was there. So the government ruled you had to program separately on AM and FM, and that gave rise to all of these different formats, and because people had to be different, they couldn't keep doing the same thing, and the sale of FM receivers, and little from 1967 to 1977, and over a 10-year period, FM began to proliferate until it became the dominant force. And when more people were listening to FM than AM, which took, as they say, a decade to happen, 10 years from the day the government said go, that was the point where you could see that the AM technology was not going to sustain forever. And I didn't see any point at that moment in staying with WABC since it was on the AM technology.
Back then, ABC overreacted. When FM came into town and OR-FM, which was a fabulous radio station, started playing some great music, ABC started to get into the disco, and they lost everybody.
Also, there must be, goodness knows how many more radio stations today than there were, say, 20 years ago, or even 15 or 10 years ago. And so it's become more competitive. Everybody's fighting for their piece of the market. And, gee, let's play 7 songs in a row, and if we promise not to say anything intelligent, humorous, profound, informative, then will you listen to me? It's what I call apology radio. If I promise to shut up when you listen to me, well, then who needs you?
And who needed the in-studio musicians and live performers from radio's golden age? They were all living and vital products of their own times. And so were Alan Freed, Jocko Henderson, Murray the K, and the other 4 Beatles. It was radio that seeded these things in our minds and saw them grow into deeply held memories, often associated with our youth and childhood, but always smiling back at us saying, "We need you, sweet-talking guys."
You know, cousins, things that change are likely to change again. And in radio, that's especially true. And as the 60s rolled into the 70s, the things that had once seemed so new and daring began to sound a little, what did I call the Breakfast Club before, creaky, you know? Well, that was FM radio, which offered stereo sound and album rock, and the dominance of AM Top 40 was being challenged. Once again, there was change in and on the air. Just think of the musical changes we went through, like doo-wop to British Invasion to psychedelic to disco to rap and everything in between. Now, your Cousin Brucie has played them all. And they all had a moment or two when they captured the essence of an era. But the music does play on, my friends, and people keep on listening. Now, some listen to remember when Top 40 radio was the closest thing we've ever had to a real national personality. Some of you listen because rock and roll might be the nearest thing we've ever had to an American voice. Or whatever the reason. Cousins, you're still listening to oldies rock and classic rock and all the rock permutations. Oh yeah, rock and roll is here to stay. And what about those sweet-talking guys? Well, listen, I'm no professional prognosticator, right? But I've got to believe that the friendly voice between the songs is what brings it alive. And it's always going to be part of the radio world. After all, your cousin's still here, isn't he?
Cousin Brucie.
All right, we're back in the air here. Your Cousin Brucie, and I have the greatest music you've ever heard.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Your Cousin Brucie in New York City with all the sounds old America loves the very best.
We're the Beach Boys, and we love the WMCA good guys. When I grow up with WMCA.
Round sound on the Monday. You know we play circular records. We try to stay away from the square. Here's an ample example. Here's a sample. Here's something that's an up-and-comer. It's going to be a Hummer.
You might appreciate this story of the angry tenant who telephoned his landlord. He says, look, the roof is in such bad condition that it rains on our heads. Now, how long is this going on? And the guy said, how should I know? Why don't you call the weatherman?
You may not find us on your TV because it makes you not know. We're being brought to you on
WMCA.
Brought to you on 77 WABC.
Until then, look up who all through will be looking